Hey everybody, this is Nate from the School of Ministry, and today I want to talk about Jesus in this apologetic series that we're doing. In 1961, a man named Yuri Gagarin became the first human to go into space. He was from the Soviet Union, and that day he flew around in space for 108 minutes. And the atheism was the official communist position of the Soviet Union at the time. And so when he came back, he said, I didn't see God, because he thought that would satisfy the official atheist position. So C.S. Lewis was still alive at the time, the famous writer and author and apologist. And he wrote an essay about Yuri's claims, basically saying, hey, if you want to know the creator, you can't relate to God like someone on the first floor relates to somebody on the second floor. You can't just go higher. You can't just go into space, because if you just move from one place in creation to another place in creation, that's only going to show you more of creation. But if God is real, and if we want to experience God, we have to relate to somebody, or we would have to relate to God like Hamlet would relate to Shakespeare. You know, we would have to relate to God like a painting would relate to a painter, or a song would relate to its singer. But of course, it seems completely impossible that something created could understand its creator, right? Like, how could a song know its singer? Or how could a painter know the artist? How could a bridge know the builder? How could creation know its creator? For example, the only way that Hamlet could ever really know Shakespeare is if Shakespeare were able to write himself into the play, right? Well, the creator would have to write himself into the creation. Well, that's what the Bible is. The Bible is the story of God writing himself into his own creation. God wrote himself into history. History is his story. And Jesus, God writing himself into creation, is how we know God, because the story of Christianity is the true story of the Son of God coming to humanity to die for us. The resurrection of Jesus is what everything hangs on. And over the past 25 years, I have had thousands of conversations with people who are trying to discover for themselves if Jesus really is the Son of God. Now, there's no way in this video that I have time to tackle all of the arguments around the claims that Jesus is the Son of God, but I do want to tackle the most skeptical, frequent claim that I hear, and that is that the resurrection of Jesus never happened. In fact, atheist Richard Carrier, he said only one conclusion is justified by the evidence: Jesus is dead. That was his claim. Well, Paul, the apostle, the authors of the Gospels, and billions of people since then completely disagree. In fact, the early Christian creed that was popularized by first century believers, many historians agree that that creed was established around 30 AD, so right about the time that Jesus died. And that creed is how illiterate first century Christians were able to synthesize, memorize, or remember, and even share their faith. So Paul, he wrote this creed down, and he shared it with the church of Corinth about 25 years later after it was established. It's the most important claim in all of Christianity in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 3 through 8. Listen to how Paul said this. The language is really important. He said, for what I received, I passed on to you as of first importance, that Christ died for our sins according to the scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day according to the scriptures, and that he appeared to Peter and then to the 12. After that, he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers at the same time, most of whom are still living, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles, and last of all, he appeared to me also, as to one abnormally born. Historians, when they are talking about the resurrection of Jesus, they use something sometimes called the minimal fact approach. And this is a standard of criticism that's designed to keep a bias in check. So when they use this approach, there's two criteria that facts must meet. The first criteria is that there must be very strong historical evidence that supports the claim, right? And then the evidence must also be so strong that the vast majority of today's scholars on the subject, including skeptical ones who aren't Christians, accept these claims as historical facts. So really quickly, what I want to do is I want to go through 5 minimal facts about Jesus' resurrection. This is why we can trust and believe this hinging, critical, most penultimate important moment in our faith that Jesus did rise from the dead? Well, the first one deals with his death itself. The first minimal fact is that Jesus was killed by crucifixion. Historical forensics supports this beyond doubt. Like Jesus, he didn't pass out, he didn't go to sleep, which is sometimes called the swoon theory. Jesus died, and many witnesses saw this happen. And then the second minimal fact is that Jesus' disciples did believe that he rose and that he appeared to them. The same people that abandoned Jesus at the moment of his arrest, later they believed in his resurrection and his lordship so strongly that every one of them were willing to die for that belief. The third minimal fact is the conversion of the church persecutor, Paul. Paul was a self-asserted enemy of the burgeoning early Christian movement, and he switched sides with nothing to gain, at least from a naturalist perspective. He had nothing to gain from that conversion other than persecution and eventual martyrdom. Paul, a persecutor of the early church, he died for his belief in Jesus. The fourth minimal fact is the conversion of the skeptic James, who was Jesus' half-brother. James was a devout Jew who grew up with Jesus. Not only did he convert to Christianity, but James became a pastor who worked at the heart of the early church in Jerusalem, where all these things were happening. And the fifth minimal fact, which we're going to hang out on for a minute, is that Jesus' tomb, it was empty. So let's talk about this with a few more facts for a second. The first one is called the Jerusalem factor, okay? Jesus was publicly executed. He was buried in Jerusalem, and his resurrection was proclaimed right there in the very same city. In fact, just a few weeks after the crucifixion, Peter declares to this crowd in Jerusalem in Acts chapter 2, verse 32, God has raised this Jesus to life, and we are all witnesses of the fact. It's a historical fact they believed in. Another thing about the empty tomb is called enemy attestation, okay? Skeptics claimed or were saying that the disciples had stolen the body. In fact, the religious leaders, they paid the soldiers guarding it to spread that story, which is actually an indirect admission that the body was unavailable for display. Because all they had to do is go get the body from the tomb and roll out the gruesome corpse for everybody to see, and Christianity would have died before it even had a chance to begin. But of course they couldn't, because the tomb was empty. The next thing about the empty tomb is the fact that, man, liars make poor martyrs. Like, are we really supposed to believe that the disciples conspired to steal the body of Jesus? They actually pulled off the heist, and then they were willing to suffer continuously and even die for what they knew was a lie? It's ridiculous. And one of the last things is the testimony of women. Okay, women, they were the first to discover the vacant grave, the empty tomb. And in first century Jewish and Roman cultures, women were treated like second-class citizens. Their testimony was actually considered questionable, wasn't even admissible in matters of law and civic stuff. So in first century Jerusalem, you would never hurt your own credibility if you were inventing a story by saying that it was a woman or women who discovered the empty tomb. But of course, that's the claim the Gospels make, because that's what's actually happened. I love what William Ward of Oxford University said. He put it this way. He says, all the strictly historical evidence that we have is in favor of the empty tomb. And these scholars who reject it, they ought to recognize that they do so on some other ground than that of scientific history. That's pretty good, but I like what John the Beloved said even better in John 19:35. John said, he who saw it has borne witness, his testimony is true, and he knows that he is telling the truth, so that you may also believe. Your Creator wrote himself into his creation. He was born, suffered, died, and resurrected, and the gospel is for you. You can trust the gospel. You can trust in Jesus. God bless you.